Hey, everyone out there studying hard for those UPSC exams, whether you're focused on mains or prelims, that keeping up with what's happening in the economy is super important.
It really is, and there's been a lot of buzz lately about a move the RBI made, and we're going to break that down today.
Exactly. We're diving deep, as we like to say, into the RBI's recent repo rate cut, and we're basing this all on some great reporting from the Indian Express.
So this decision from the RBI's Monetary Policy Committee, it's gotten people talking because it kind of shows how they're thinking about handling the Indian economy in the middle of all this global stuff going on.
It's a lot to untangle. So that's what we're here to do, and of course, we want to zero in on what you guys really need to know for your exams.
Absolutely. Let's make it crystal clear.
Okay, so first things first, the big news is that the MPC, they went ahead and cut the repo rate, again, by 1/4 of a percentage point.
Right. 25 basis points is what you'll often hear people say.
Yeah, and that brings it down to 6% total, and this is actually the second time in a row they've done this. Now, I'm sure a lot of you listening know this stuff backwards and forwards, but just in case anyone needs a little reminder,
Yeah, always good to recap.
what exactly is the repo rate, and why should we even care?
Well, think of it this way. The repo rate is basically what it costs for commercial banks to borrow money from the RBI,
Okay.
and that rate ends up being like a benchmark. It kind of sets the tone for how much it costs everybody else, businesses, people like us, to take out loans.
I see.
So when the repo rate goes up or down, it ripples out and affects how much we're all paying to borrow money, which then changes how much we invest and spend.
So it's a pretty big deal then.
Oh, absolutely. Has a huge impact.
And one thing the Indian Express really emphasized in their article was this interesting shift in the RBI's overall stance.
Yeah, they definitely highlighted that.
They went from being neutral to being accommodative.
Right.
So what's the difference there, and why is it such a big deal?
Well, when the RBI says neutral, it basically means they have wiggle room. They can raise rates or lower them depending on what's happening. But when they say accommodative, that's like a clear sign. They're leaning towards supporting economic growth, and they do that by keeping those rates lower.
So it's a pretty clear signal.
Yeah, and the governor actually came out and said this means they're either going to keep the rates where they are or even cut them more, which is a pretty big change from where they were before when they were more focused on keeping inflation under control.
Interesting. So what's pushing them towards this pro-growth stance? The Indian Express pointed to some pretty serious stuff happening globally, especially when it comes to trade.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the main things they're worried about, all this uncertainty in the global economy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of it comes down to trade tensions, countries putting tariffs on each other's goods back and forth.
Yeah.
And India's been hit with some of those tariffs too. And all of this just creates this atmosphere where businesses get nervous about investing and demand might go down.
So it makes things unpredictable.
Exactly. And that can really hurt India's growth.
And I guess that's why the RBI adjusted their own growth expectations for India.
Yep. They did. They lowered their GDP growth forecast just a little bit from 6.7% down to 6.5% for the current fiscal year.
Okay, so not a huge change, but
But still significant. And it shows they're taking those global challenges seriously. And they're thinking about how it might impact things like investment and how much people are spending and even how well our exports are doing.
right, so we've got these global headwinds, but one thing we always talk about is the whole inflation situation.
Right. The big balancing act.
Exactly. And it sounds like, based on the article, that inflation isn't as much of a concern right now.
And there's a reason for that. It's kind of interesting. So while global growth is facing all these challenges, we also have global commodity prices and even crude oil prices going down.
Okay.
And that's actually helping to keep inflation under control here in India. So the RBI decided to revise their inflation forecast downwards a bit. So the fact that inflation seems to be relatively stable right now gives the RBI a bit more breathing room to focus on supporting growth. They basically said right now those risks to growth are a bigger concern than immediate worries about inflation.
That makes sense. The Indian Express article also mentioned a few other things the RBI announced, kind of in passing.
Yeah,
Anything in there that we should be paying attention to?
honestly, they were mostly technical things like introducing these forward contracts in government securities, and they talked about expanding access to some trading platforms and even creating new internet domains for financial entities.
Wow.
Oh, and they're increasing security for cross-border card transactions. So it's all about making the financial system work a little bit smoother and safer.
So important, but maybe not the biggest news of the day.
Right. The repo rate cut and that shift in the RBI's stance, those are the really big takeaways for anyone studying for their UPSC exams.
Absolutely. So just to recap for everyone listening, what you really need to know is that the RBI has cut that repo rate down to 6%.
Right.
They're taking an accommodative approach,
Uh-huh.
basically saying they're going to try to help the economy grow.
Yeah.
And this is all happening in response to all that uncertainty we talked about in the global economy.
Exactly.
But the reason they can even do this is because things are relatively calm on the inflation front right now. At least that's what it looks like.
It does. And honestly, understanding this decision, why they made it, and what could happen because of it, all of that, is so important for grasping what's going on in the Indian economy right now.
And how it all fits into what's happening globally.
Exactly. And that's crucial stuff for both your prelims and your mains.
Definitely. So keep this all in mind as you keep studying. And if you want to go even deeper, remember to like and subscribe and leave us a comment with any questions you've got.
We love hearing from you guys.
And don't forget, everything we talked about today was based on that fantastic reporting from the Indian Express. So big thanks to them.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
Now, here's something to think about. Given all these steps the RBI is taking, how do you think India's decisions on the domestic front will shape its ability to deal with this increasingly complex and maybe even fragmented global economic order in the long run?
It's a big question.
It is a really big question. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. So keep those comments coming.
And until next time, happy studying.
See you then.